Commander Graham Bethune, a pilot in the U.S. Navy, was rated for just about any winged military aircraft you can think of in his day. A 26-year veteran, he began flying sorties over Europe during World War II and held top secret clearance flying VIP transport planes across the Atlantic, including the Secretary of the Navy, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, the Supreme Allied Commander over NATO, Admiral Lynde McCormick, as well as General Dwight D. Eisenhower. After the war, he became a test pilot and served 6 years with the Naval Bureau of Aeronautics, headed for the astronaut class, before retiring in the early 60s with over 10,000 Navy and civilian hours in the air. In this special interview with Reality Entertainment, Graham Bethune claims our skies are saturated with UFOs, and his experiences over the Atlantic, including a February 10, 1951 encounter with a 300-foot UFO over Iceland. Let's listen to Commander Graham Bethune.
My name is Commander Graham Bethune. I'm a retired Navy pilot, and I had a commercial rating before I came into the military, went through the Navy's training. And when I was flying transports, we had a lot of the airline pilots that we recalled during Korea and things of that nature because they were in the reserve. And so I got an airline transport rating while I was in that squadron because I had flown every transport that the Navy had. And my transport rating is single engine land and sea, multi-engine land and sea, and then all the planes listed, most of it I had. Okay, so that I flew the North Atlantic probably, I guess, including the seaplane, probably about 10 years. I started flying in 1940. And of course, I learned after I got off the ground that everything they taught us was backwards. And I learned a lot of things that if you get off the ground to 400 or 500 or 1,000 feet and fly around this planet, you'll find out it is saturated with extraterrestrial evidence. But when you're flying at 35,000 feet in a cattle car, you don't see anything, you don't learn anything. So all of these things I learned quick because it was so different when you got off the ground. So I was, 1942, I had a mechanics rating, a commercial pilot's rating, and Admiral Reed, the man that flew the North Atlantic, first pilot, 1919, he's the one that talked me into getting into the Navy. And because of my qualifications, didn't have enough college, so I had to take an exam. But I went to the University of North Carolina, along with the older George Bush, along with Ted Williams, a famous baseball player. I could name a lot of, and guess who our athletic instructor was? Gerald Ford. So then I went through the regular Navy training program, but having a lot of flight hours and experience at that time, I just breezed right through it. It was very easy. Graduated from Pensacola, June 1943. That's the Academy of the Air, Cradle of Naval Aviation. I volunteered because the Navy had started a navigation training program for just navigators. They didn't have any regular, all Navy pilots were trained navigators, and we navigated with the stars back in those days. I first left there and I went to a seaplane squadron in Rio. I'd always wanted to go to Brazil. And we flew 16 hours every third night hunting German submarines. During this period of time, of course, you see things down in the South Atlantic, no UFO chase teams, no particle beams, no satellites. You see things that were not hostile down in that area, so we saw a lot of things. In 1945, when I came back, I was on the search for the planes in the Bermuda Triangle. Then I went into transports, and I finally got an airline transport rating in addition to the Navy rating. So I was stationed at Patuxent River, Maryland, 1950, and we were flying a 4-engine, actually DC-4 R5Ds, and later the Super Constellation. They had a large meeting in Washington, D.C. in February, first part of February, 1951, where Eisenhower, who was the Supreme Allied Commander, was part of this meeting, and some of the NATO countries. And and Vice Admiral Hugh Carter, Radford, who would later become First Joint Chiefs of Staff. At this meeting, they had decided to provide Iceland with troops. So I was one of the two sent to Iceland to negotiate the logistics of flying troops up there. This was 1952, February the 5th. At the end of this meeting with Lockheed Overseas and Iceland, I said, could somebody explain to me why you requested troops? And this gentleman from Lockheed Overseas, he managed the airport, he said, well, we're seeing these big objects and monsters, and they had lights, they didn't make any noise, they could disappear, and all these type of things. And God, I said, and I said, what kind of a wingspan? Oh, no, they were round, they were circular. So when he said that, I said, oh, hell, you know, we don't have anything like that because I fly out of a naval tester. We test all, and we know everything on the drawing board. I said, what did our government tell you they were? They said, your government said they were possibly experimental Russian bombers. So we all laughed. So I was the pilot, but we took off at night. And the skies were clear. And 1,400 and some nautical miles, about 300 miles outside of Argentia, Newfoundland, which is right here. I saw like a city on the water in a distance. And of course you can't make out any lights, but it was a pretty good sized city. I said, what the hell is this doing out in the middle of the ocean? So I checked with the navigator and he said, well, it just took a 3-star fix, we're on course. And we're not near Iceland or Labrador, and we got a 60-knot headwind. And that was it. So he knew where we were. We passed over the weather ship, which gives you the weather report. And part of the weather report in that part of the hemisphere is the northern lights. If there's any northern lights activity, they tell you. There were no northern lights activity. So here we sit. We sit and look, seeing and saying, what the hell is this? As we get close to this city, we start to see lights, big circle of lights. What the hell are they doing out here? I thought maybe the Navy was recovering something, you know, secret. So as we get closer, there were very defined lights, a dozen or so of them, monster circle. And this was 45 miles away. This was about 30 miles away. And then when we got about 15, 20 miles away, the lights went out. Of course, all the heads were behind me, the crews and whatever, looking at what the hell happened. And so in maybe a minute, we didn't see anything. So what the hell happened here? Somebody turned the switch. Next thing we saw was on the water was a little yellow halo in the center, where it was really been in the center, where whatever it was that was launched came from under the water, or it came from a large craft on the water. Now, we're about 15 miles away at that time. This thing, the yellow halo, whew, like that, 15 miles in a fraction of a second. I disengaged the autopilot to push the nose over because we were at a collision course. And when I did, I just saw it head on. It's 300 feet in diameter. We knew that. We had a knowing, like somebody was telling us, 300 feet in diameter. So at that time, I heard a hell of a noise. And I said to Fred, what the hell was that? He said, well, the navigator and the radio man ducking fell, hit their head, one hit their head, hurt their arm, they were scrambling on the deck. So I thought it hit us underneath. So I said, well, where in the hell did it go? And Fred said, it's right over to the right. I can see it. I couldn't see it. So it drifted forward about 5 miles from it. It never got to the altitude that we were at, a few hundred feet below. And so I began to watch it. Well, we knew then it was a friendly encounter. They just wanted us to see him. So then I went to engage the autopilot again. The magnetic compass was doing like this. And the bird dogs, which is direction finders, the two bird dogs, they were pointing right at this thing, just vibrating like this. So I told Fred, did you see that coming? He said, it was close, it was doing this. And so I went back to the vacuum operator. That's the old airplane, the vacuum operator, hydraulic operator control. So I go back to that. And so then we sat there and watched it for a while, because it just paced us, stayed with us. Al Jones, which was the original plane commander, took my seat. And it was still there, he was watching it. And as I was walking back aft, he decided he was going to chase it. And so he disengaged. When I get back aft, I wanted to see how the passengers were doing. They're all on the right-hand side. They could see it underneath the wing. And then, oh hell, I recognized the doctor back. He was a psychiatrist out of Bethesda Naval Hospital, plus a lot of other things. So I said, I better talk to him first. So Cornell said, did you see what we saw, Doc? He grinned at me and looked me straight down. Yeah, he says, yeah, that was a flying saucer. I didn't look at it. I don't believe in such things. So I went back, I said, Al, don't call anybody know anything. He'll lock us up as soon as we get on around. So he says, too late. I called Ganner to see if they could track it by radar. I said, what'd they say? They said that we were the only aircraft in the area, and they normally say you're the only traffic in the area. And so we knew the cat was out of the bag. When we landed Argentia, they had flown the Air Force in, Captain Paulson, to interrogate. We had to wait on him. So, then we knew that they had tracked it by radar, or they wouldn't send anybody there. So that's how. So all made our reports. Then when we got back to Patuxent River over here, we had the intelligence Navy come down. And they didn't question any of the passengers. We had a lot of pilots in the passengers too. And they tried to question Dr. Moser, and I don't want to tell you his name, but he didn't want to talk about the doctor. So that, as a result of that, the Air Force had made their report. We had to make out individual reports, never saw each other's report. And it went to Washington Navy Intelligence. At that time, the Air Force, we had given them the flying saucer project because they wanted everything that flew, including my models. And so they had the whole thing. So it went from there, of course, through the chain to right back. Okay, here we go. Eisenhower was familiar with our encounter because he was a Supreme Allied Commander. He was familiar with all encounters in the North Atlantic. So when he was elected president, he wanted a briefing. That's your MJ-12 document. Vice Admiral Heuenkotter briefed him on what we knew here. So then, as a result, we found out that our encounter was orchestrated to show us what the Icelanders were seeing. And it took us a long time to figure that out. So they sent a group in from another universe, and I don't want to get too much in detail there, but it's very important. This group. This is the radar scope picture from the Air Force. This group, 21 craft, and they were checking us out. Their mind perceivers, they could tell your level of awareness and all this type of thing, whether you're ready for anything or what the fear is. All I can say is, this is an Air Force jet here, and those are saucers around. It's all organized out there, confederations, just like we have different things that are organized. So they had to go to another universe that could communicate with us. We're so primitive, there's no way that they could ever communicate with us unless they had a group that come in that could come into the third dimension. Now, this group, this photograph was August the 13th, 1952. And there were 68 craft. These are the ones that did actual communication with our leaders. And of course, Eisenhower wanted proof of something. And of course, he wanted to go out into space. He wanted to go to the other side of the moon to see the bases on the dark side of the moon. So here again, they could not do that. They had to get a hold of the Palladians. They have a Palladian connection, which have been here with us for many years. So the Palladians took him from Muroc, which is now Edwards Air Force Base, out to the other side of the moon. Adros was the commander of that ship. This is where the decisions were made, because each time that they meet with our presidents, they tell them that they have to get rid of their atomic weapons, or they will not share any more technology, because we make a weapon out of everything that they give us. So that was what was told to Eisenhower. Well, he had doubts, here again, the military-industrial complex, about whether he could pull anything like this, disrupt the economy, according to him, and he was afraid of our neighbor Russia at the time. They said, we'll take care of that. So as a result, the crew on the ground made some big mistakes. They were going to confiscate these craft, and so that they turned around and came back. So Eisenhower did not sign with a good group. He finally signed with another group. So that's how that all ties in. Now, how do I know a lot of this? I was flying when Eisenhower became president, the man that relieved him was Admiral McCormick, and that's who I was flying for a little over a year. And of course, you learn a lot from the age. You don't get a chance to talk to him. And this is my aircraft here. It's a sleeper. It's a real pleasure, just like Harry Truman's Sacred Cow. And so that's what I was flying, and so I had kind of first-hand knowledge on a lot of these things because I eventually had a top-secret clearance. And the people that I met with their age and everything as a part of the party, they were involved in all this. So that's how my encounter really fits in with the overall scheme. And I knew about this, but I was never told or threatened. My wing commander called me in, and he wanted to explain. I explained it to him. He says, "Look," he says, "you know that's one thing that you don't talk about, not even to your wife." Well, that was enough for me. I'm in military. If it was national security, that's what I was there for. So I never did talk about it. And when I got to Detroit with the Bureau of Aeronautics, I was amazed at how many people knew about him. So I finally broke down and talked to the vice president of Ford Motor Company and Tex Colbert, the president of Chrysler, a few of them, in secret. That's when I first started. So Major Kehoe had contacted my boss, who was an aeronautical engineer, because we spent a lot of time at Wright-Patterson. And my boss was used to go through the project Bluebook and all the societies he had because of his knowledge in aeronautical engineering. And he found our report. And he couldn't understand why I didn't want to see it or why I didn't want to see what was at Wright-Patterson. I said, well, I can't ever talk about it, so I wasn't really worried about it. This is my report. These documents here you can see are the archives. They accidentally hid it, and they couldn't find it. They put in Project Twinkle. And so my boss had found it down at Wright-Patterson, so I knew it existed. And that's the first time I knew what speed that they tracked it at radar. They tracked it in excess of 1,800 miles an hour. So the weather report and everything else I found out, but I didn't find a radar report. So based on that, I've got the whole history in here, Major Kehoe's report to Congress. I've got Vice Admiral Healy-Cutter's report in Major Kehoe's book that he was going to go before Congress with it. I've got Kehoe's book, Flying Saucers, Top Secret. The whole first chapter of Flying Saucers, Top Secret is devoted to our encounter. And they didn't fortunately mention our names. They gave us a fictitious name because we were still on active duty. So they were still after me to go forward. And so when Admiral Vice Admiral Healy-Cutter finally gave in to the Air Force, I thought, well, you know, I'm just not going to say anything. I first told somebody it was Michael Hessman, because all the astronauts would go to London, go to Germany to give their story because they couldn't give it here. So that's how it got to be known. And then the young kids on a computer found Timothy Good's report. Incidentally, his report that he got was declassified under an executive order, whereas the Air Force had a regular downgrading every so many years, you know. And so it's everywhere I looked, it's in every kind of book that you can imagine. I even got a copy recently of a comic book, so that makes it official. It's as long as it's in the comic book. What happened is I had a home at Pawtucket River, about 50 air miles from here, and I was working on a room. I didn't have a TV on, and it came on the news and his voice. And he said basically he knew that the people were concerned about what was flying over Washington, D.C., and that they could be assured that there's really nothing to worry about, that we know all about it. They're not here to harm us. Very short, maybe 3 or 4 sentences, and that was about it. So which led us to believe in his statement, okay, the government knows what it is, that's all we care about. We trusted the government then. What the president said was right, so that's what happened. In reality, he had no choice. He could not really, without getting bumped off like Kennedy, have done anything other than what he did. And he thought maybe he could work it out, but it was really the military-industrial complex that he was up against, plus the people that have the money. So that's where he sat. Okay, my communication is not directly, I have never wanted it, because I think my credibility would really be destroyed pretty quick if I started talking about that. So my communications is with a lot of beings that have incarnated here from the Pleiades, Syria, Andromedas, and God knows what. And a lot of these are channelers too, or mediums. I don't take too much stock in that because anybody can communicate with them. A lot of them are disembodied spirits and they're looking for a body to get. So if you want to really communicate, that's usually who you get. But these beings, they do, if you're familiar with remote viewing, I know they're top remote viewers. I've asked them for years, I was always told that you could not remote view these things in our inner Earth because they're a different dimension. Not all of them, there's some third dimensions in our inner Earth, 237 cities. So my question always has been to them, if I come here in my ship and I've got a lot of work to do here, and I don't want to go back, which maybe 4 hours, four light years away is less than 4 hours in their craft. And I said, I got an inner Earth base now. In order for me to go in the inner Earth base, I got to raise my vibrations or frequency. Can you find my base? And every one of them said, the top one says, yes, we can remote view base. I was always told that you couldn't because you couldn't see anything in another dimension. He says, that's not true. I said, well, why won't we hear from you? He said, well, to start with, nobody would believe us. The second thing, nobody, we don't have any proof of it. We can't show them because they're a different dimension. So that bugged me. I thought, well, now, here these guys can tell me what we saw. It came from a submarine base, our encounter. That's where they were based. Two different universes had that particular. So through dealing with the Pleiadians at 23rd dimension and up, they can travel through the black holes, 500. These people here were 333 dimensions. And they can travel that way. Well, since that's the case, their remote viewing is energy. The thing is that, as I said, when we were down in the South Atlantic, we were seeing things that we'd never seen before. And we wouldn't even mention it to each other. In other words, if I mentioned it to the co-pilot, I would be afraid that he wouldn't want to fly with me anymore in the same way. And so about all the pilots, every time I got in, after we retired and we had these reunions, is when we started talking about what we were seeing. But if you fly any period of time, now I'm not saying 35,000 feet in the cattle car, I'm saying down low where we were flying. And if you navigate with the stars, you're constantly seeing things in there. So back in the days I was flying, it was very common. My dad was in World War I. When I told him about the Foo Fighters, he said, explain those Foo Fighters to me. He was over in France, Eddie Rickenbacker Squad, mechanic. I was explaining, he said, oh hell, we call those Kraut fireballs in World War I. And some of like Frank Edwards, a lot of these people could tell you stories more, they saw more than we did. So these things have been around since we have about 8.5 million years. They brought us here.